Hello there, kia ora. You might have noticed on the news recently a lot of talk around mass migration because, well, a lot of people are leaving. The records that were released this week showed 127,800 people packed up and left the country in the last 12 months, and it's the highest number ever recorded. That, by the way, is the population of Dunedin. If all of Dunedin packed up and left, that's what's moving out of the country. We've had some people come in, but that seems to be decreasing as well, meaning that we've got the largest net migration loss on record, and it's the largest that's been recorded since February 2012. And it's almost like there's some kind of correlation there, but I'm still trying to put my finger on it. I mean, when it comes to mass migration, it's one of those things that I'm sure nobody saw coming. Or did they? If we take a look at migration numbers, for example, moving from Aotearoa to Australia, well, there was a really big bump in the middle of the John Key era. That's what that big bulgy part in the middle is there. And while there's been talk recently about New Zealanders up and leaving since the end of lockdowns, that uptick has nowhere near matched what we saw during the John Key era. And a lot of those policies that drove people to moving to Australia, well, they're back on the table again under the current government coalition, which means that we're kind of setting up the factors again to drive people overseas. There's actually three different areas that lead to brain drain. There's economic opportunities, there's political strife and stability, and there's persecution based around things like religion, gender, or sexuality. When it comes to that third one, that's not such a big driver in this country. Our laws are pretty similar in those areas. But if the government's going to keep letting people like Brian Tamaki get away with closing things down because he doesn't like the sound of them, maybe that'll change. And when it comes to political strife and instability, that's generally on a much larger scale than just a coalition of idiots who don't know what they're doing taking snips at each other. But when it comes to economic opportunities, that's what's going to be letting our economy down, our country, and driving these people overseas. It includes finding jobs that pay better for the same amount of work. All you need to do is talk to police officers or educators or people who work in the healthcare departments and health force. They'll tell you that the money you get in Australia for the same work is better. And while it might be taxed at a higher rate, and they might have things like a capital gains tax, it's still better off economically for them over there. There's higher standards of living when you deal with how much people get paid, how much they pay for services and goods, and how much they have access to things like housing, and healthcare is also a really big part of it. Getting onto the housing ladder in this country is incredibly difficult for a lot of people. It's far easier to do that across the ditch. And when you've got mass unemployment coming because the government's decided it needs to cut back on everything, and you've got all these really highly skilled individuals who are suddenly looking for work, finding that they get paid more for doing the same amount of work in a place that costs less to live, those are the factors that lead to a brain drain. Yeah, look, the facts are pretty simple. This government has set up very specifically the conditions that lead to brain drain. They've made it so that people don't feel secure in their work, that they don't feel valued, and that's a really big driver for how people move about when it comes to immigration. Just a 2 hour flight away, you've got what feels like the land of milk and honey: better pay rates, better conditions, better tax systems, fairer systems for everybody, usually. Don't get me wrong, it's full of Australians. I totally get why there might be some trepidation. But for a lot of people, well, what they're being offered here versus what they're being offered there, they're worlds apart. And that's a huge driver in people moving overseas. What is actually a surprise here is just how quickly this has happened. Because realistically, it took a couple of years for the John Key policy effects to come into place because, well, it took a while for those to come through. But now we know what the effects of those policies are on the way that our country works, on the way that people feel, on things like our education and healthcare systems. And people are basically leaving a sinking ship. It's like knowing that the Titanic is coming and there is an iceberg dead ahead. And that should be a concern for the government. But it's not. Back when I made that first video, it was because of a comment that had come out from the government where they said they know that they're going to be losing the country's best and brightest and that they were creating the effects of a brain drain. Which means essentially we're kind of stuck with it. For those people that are sticking around, totally get it. And those people that are going overseas also totally get it. It's a really tough situation and people have to work out what's best for them on an individual basis. But I don't think we've seen the last of this. We might have seen an initial bump and it'll go down a little bit. But realistically speaking, as long as things feel better for people in other parts of the world, what's keeping them here?